At the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, I was a junior in high school. At the time, I thought I'd just be off for 3 weeks and was fairly excited for the time off, not realizing how it would consume the collective lives of the world going forward until much later. However, for the time being, I saw it as a good time to catch up on my enormous backlog of games, anime, and manga. So, around late March of 2020, I booted up the Steins visual novel for the first time. Steins had piqued my interest for a long time beforehand. When I was initially getting into anime in late 2017 and early 2018, I had once heard someone advise me against watching the Steins anime for the time being, as it was apparently a bad pick for somebody just getting into anime. This added a sort of mystical air to Steins for me, as I held on to this advice for a long time. However, by the time I bought the visual novel and its pseudo-sequel Steins 0 on sale in December 2019, I figured I was immersed enough in anime culture to tackle it. Now, over a year after finishing Steins I'm incredibly happy to say that in my opinion, that advice I received was actually wrong. Steins TV anime adaptation is wonderful and a great pick for veterans and newcomers alike. Even the visual novel can serve as a solid introduction point for those new to the medium. In fact, it might as well have been my first visual novel aside from maybe something like Danganronpa. However, it's definitely best to establish what Steins is about as well. Thankfully, I can give the basic gist of Steins while only revealing very baseline information about it. Spoilers for the prologue and first chapter of the visual novel, or alternatively the first 2 or 3 episodes of the anime, will be present. Steins is definitely best experienced as blind as possible, so if you're worried, then maybe go check out that to start off. Also, disclaimer, this will primarily be about the original Steins visual novel and TV anime. For the most part, I won't be considering Steins 0, as I haven't finished it, nor will I be talking about the original Steins movie. So, with that out of the way, sit back and relax, as today, on Talking About My Favorite Stuff, I'll be looking at an all-time favorite of mine, Steins Gate. Steins Gate is a visual novel video game released for the Xbox 360 on October 15th, 2009, eventually seeing a North American release in March of 2014 for the PC, and subsequently being ported to the PSP, PS3, Vita, PS4, and mobile platforms over the years. Following Chaos Head, it is the second title in 5-Powered Basics and Nitro Plus's science adventure visual novel series, and an anime adaptation of Steins Gate aired in 2011, followed by an original movie sequel in 2013. Additionally, Steins received a sort of what-if scenario visual novel titled Steins 0, initially released in 2015. Steins 0, despite the name implying a prequel, follows a plot-significant timeline that is overwritten in the ending of Steins 0 eventually received an anime adaptation in 2018, animated by White Fox, who also animated previous Steins anime installments. On top of this, Steins received multiple spin-offs, as well as a remake entitled Steins Elite, and the characters from the series also appear in Robotics Notes, another science adventure game. Steins follows Okabe Rintaro, who goes by the nickname Hoin Kyoma.
You are speaking to member 001, lab founder, evil genius, and mad scientist extraordinaire. 'Tis I, Hoin Kyoma.
I still think that Ocarine sounds way cuter.
Silence!
Okabe is a self-proclaimed mad scientist, as well as the founding member 001 of his Future Gadget Laboratory, which he operates with childhood friend and quote-unquote hostage Mayuri Shina, and his otaku super hacker friend Itaru Hashida, nicknamed Daru. Our story starts on a hot August day, as Okabe and Mayuri are visiting the conference of a certain Dr. Nakabachi, who is giving a presentation on time travel. There, Okabe meets a girl named Makise Kurisu. In his brief conversations with Makise, he finds that their memories of the day don't totally line up, but this is the last thing on Okabe's mind when, after being escorted away for interrupting the conference, he hears a scream of anguish from down the hall. Curious, Okabe follows the scream, only to find Makise Kurisu dead on the floor. Rushing out of the conference building and into the streets of Akihabara, Okabe meets back up with Mayuri, frantically explaining the events of the day. When he goes to send a message of what he's seen to Daru, Okabe's surroundings suddenly shift, as the previously packed Akihabara was now not only completely empty, but also closed off due to a satellite crash in the building Nakabachi gave his conference in. Okabe and Mayuri return to the Future Gadget Lab, where Daru is ready for their next test of a phone-operated microwave invention, tentatively titled the
Phone Wave, real name TBA,
which is exhibiting strange phenomena. Okabe continues to encounter unusual events, such as his memories being asynchronous with the news reports of the day, and his message to Daru arriving days in advance. Regardless, Okabe and Daru proceed to their university class, where the former is shocked to find Makise Kurisu alive and well. Not only that, but she's giving the lecture he's about to attend. After embarrassing himself in an argument with Makise, Okabe proceeds back to the lab with Daru, where they continue to experiment on the phone wave, which is still acting strangely. Makise soon joins them, and they realize that their phone wave, in reality, is capable of some form of time travel.
This humble kitchen appliance is a time machine.
From here, Steins Gate's story focuses on the theoretical mechanics of time travel, global conspiracies, and how a group of high school and college kids react when given the power to rewrite history, and the consequences of their actions. Steins Gate's greatest strength is by far the characters. Before writing this video, I was looking back at some CGs from the visual novel, and honestly, just seeing group shots is making me miss the cast so much. Okabe is an excellent and surprisingly layered protagonist, with his status as an unreliable narrator being one of the highest merits of the VN. Makise is cool, and her interactions, especially with Okabe, are frequently comedic gold. Daru can be a bit weird, but he serves the position as the best friend character quite well, and amidst all these weirdos, Mayuri's absent-minded personality and strange tendencies manage to be the least bizarre of everything, also allowing her to serve as a solid audience anchor. And that's just the main cast. Major supporting characters like Suzuha, Ferris, and Luca are also tons of fun, and all get a pretty fair amount of screen time. Even minor characters like Mr. Braun get their time to shine. The characters are given a big boost by their designs and, in the case of the VN, their artwork. All of the character designs remain simple but instantly recognizable. Even Okabe, who just wears a basic lab coat, is easy to pick out because of his facial shape and posture. As I mentioned, in the visual novel, these designs are complemented by very unique and fitting style of Huke, also known for his work on the Blackrock Shooters franchise. All of the portraits and other assets have a sort of dirty texture to them, making everything pop really well and adding a lot to the game's atmosphere and tone. I've always said that in some way it reminds me of the art of the Portal games, especially Portal 1. While this isn't exactly translated in the anime, it's made up for with dynamic cinematography and equally unique lighting, giving a somewhat different tone but similar effect to the style of the game. Steins Gate's music also contributes majorly to the game's tone and atmosphere. The OST, composed by Takeshi Abo, is primarily made up of electronic music and a sort of synthy sound. I'm not really a musician, so it's hard for me to pinpoint, but generally the more electronic and mysterious tracks will play during scenes involving scientific explanation and conspiracy, while there's a handful of more jovial tracks that play during the more lighthearted and hopeful segments. It's all underlined by the equal parts memorable and haunting Gate of Steiner leitmotif, giving more weight to the songs it appears in. On top of all of that, the vocal tracks for both the visual novel and anime are excellent. My personal favorites of those are Skyclad Observer, AR, and Technovision. As is often the case, a big barrier to entry with Steins Gate is knowing how or where to start. This is dependent on a few factors, so I'll go one at a time. First and foremost, Steins Gate absolutely does not require that you've played or watched Chaos Head, the previous and first science adventure visual novel, to get the full experience. I know absolutely nothing about Chaos Head, and I was perfectly fine in both the anime and visual novel for Steins Gate. Some references may be present, but the story stands fine on its own. Chaos Head's VN isn't officially available in English anyways, and the anime is infamously horrible, so I wouldn't worry too much regardless. As for Steins Gate itself, the existence of Steins Gate Zero could potentially be confusing, as well as the existence of the movie. As mentioned before, Steins Gate Zero is not a prequel. In fact, the very first scene contains spoilers for the biggest twist in Steins Gate. Don't even think about touching Steins Gate Zero until you finish some iteration of Steins Gate. Although keep in mind Zero is not totally necessary to enjoy Steins Gate. The movie, on the other hand, functions as a direct sequel to the main story of the original VN and anime, alongside an OVA released in between. I personally did not really enjoy the movie that much, but it seems to be generally received pretty well. Check it out if you want, even if you played the VN first. It's an original story and doesn't require you to play Zero either. So now it comes down to whether you'd prefer to watch the anime or read the visual novel. Visual novels can be daunting, and understandably so. I'm honestly not totally versed in the medium myself, but with that limited perspective, I found Steins Gate to be a perfectly enjoyable read. All you have to understand is that it is fairly long, anywhere from 40 to 50 hours for a playthrough of all the endings, at an average reading speed. Also, as you'd expect, the visuals are limited in comparison to those of the anime. On the other hand, the anime is actually an incredible adaptation, staying almost completely faithful to the original VN. It's as popular as it is for a reason, and watching it will give you the authentic Steins Gate experience for sure. For those more interested in the internal thoughts of Okabe, or who are looking for deeper dives into the science and general universe explanations of Steins Gate, I would highly recommend the visual novel. That 50-hour playtime is not unearned. The VN goes hard on the scientific aspects of Steins Gate's world. and being told in first person allows a better view of Okube's psyche, which, in my opinion, were the two most interesting aspects of Steins Gate. On the other hand, for those who are sticklers about English audio, steer clear of the visual novel and head straight for the anime. While Steins Gate's VN has been officially translated in full into English, the game's full Japanese voice acting remains the only voice option. You can turn it off if you really want to, but I personally didn't have a problem with it after getting used to it pretty quick. On my one watch of the anime, I watched the English dub, which is how I prefer to watch anime. The dubbing is honestly very well done, with every voice fitting incredibly well, and J. Michael Tatum's performance as Okube quickly becoming one of my favorite VA performances of all time. However, the Japanese voice acting for the VN is also very good. I usually don't have much to say about Japanese VA, but the performances in Steins Gate were genuinely very memorable, and didn't become grating at all over the 50 hours I heard them. So the only other notable difference, going off of the discussion of dubs, would be some localization differences. The VN, as mentioned, is fully translated into English officially. However, there's a lot of uncut lingo relating to Japanese otaku culture that might not be as relevant to Western audiences. However, the game does feature an encyclopedia of useful terms, including those specific to Steins Gate, as well as scientific wording and the aforementioned internet and otaku terminology. Because of this, you shouldn't have an issue understanding what's going on most of the time, and this actually helped a good bit in understanding the actual science behind everything. Alternatively, the anime's English dub localizes many of these jokes about otaku culture to be more relevant to Western audiences. I never had an issue with these. I found them often more funny than the original jokes as a native English speaker living in North America. However, either option is equally valid, and the choice is all yours. Regardless of whether you choose to read the visual novel or to watch the anime, Steins Gate is an absolute must for any fan of anime culture. Despite the science fiction theming and potential barrier of entry, I found that Steins Gate's core appeal lies in the characters, the setting, and the core themes of the story more than anything, and therefore can be appreciated by basically anyone willing to give it a chance. So if you've never checked it out, give Steins Gate a try. I'm confident you won't regret it. Anyways, thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you soon.